Hey everyone, welcome to Tent Talk, the Farmers Market podcast. This podcast is all about farmers markets, how to increase your market business success, and in our current climate, maximize safety while providing people with fresh food. Farmers markets are essential. Whether you're a farmers market manager or a small farmer or food maker selling at farmers markets, you have found just the right podcast. On today's episode of Tent Talk, we're talking with Lihlani Nelson of Vermont Law School about free speech issues at farmers markets. Hey everyone, I'm one of your hosts, Bridget Myers. I've spent years as an on-site farmers market manager, and I'm the education coordinator at Farmers Market Pros.
And I'm Kat Fields-White, Director of San Diego Markets, still an active Farmers Market Manager, hoisting those barricades, founders of Farmers Market Pros, and host of the Farmers Market Pros community and membership.
And I'm co-host Justine Marzoni-Mead, Tent Talk producer, marketing director for Farmers Market Pros, and any minute now, technical coordinator for Intense, the Farmers Market Conference 2021.
That's right. We've been having great conversations with State Farmers Market Association leaders from around the country, and we're looking forward to sharing more information with you soon about Intense, the Farmers Market Conference, coming to you live online on February 15th through 18th, 2021.
Wow.
Well, welcome back, everybody, to Tent Talk. Today we are chatting with Lihlani Nelson, Associate Director and Research Fellow at the Center for Agriculture and Food Systems at Vermont Law School. Vermont Law School developed the Farmers Market Legal Toolkit in cooperation with our friends at the Farmers Market Coalition. Hi.
Hi, Lihlani.
Welcome.
Hi, thank you all. Happy to be here. Just want to add, we developed the Farmers Market Legal Toolkit with Farmers Market Coalition and NOPA Vermont. They're our other partner who helped us produce the toolkit. So just have to give them a little shout out too.
Oh, thank you for
great.
doing
Awesome.
that. What's NOFA stand for? What's that acronym for?
It is the Northeast Organic Farming Association.
All right.
Vermont. I'm pretty sure of that.
Great.
We will look it up.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Well, that's a great slate of groups to be involved with that.
Yeah. So Lihlani, let's just start. Could you give us a little bit about your professional background and prior to your time at the Vermont Law School, have you ever been involved with farmers markets before or anything like that?
Yeah, great question. So I graduated college not really knowing what I wanted to do, but was interested in kind of science and food. But since I didn't know, I went to do AmeriCorps in Washington State and was working at a school there doing early literacy intervention work. And it was during that time where I was like shocked to find out that a lot of kids really had no idea where their food came from. And we were doing an after school snack program, and I grew up with a dad who loved gardening, and so I was aware that you could like grow a carrot and eat it, but a lot of these kids didn't understand that a baby carrot, was grown under ground. So I became really interested in figuring out how to integrate some hands-on learning into the work that we were doing and helped the community build a school garden. Long story short, I did another year with AmeriCorps. There was a farm to school program in Madison, Wisconsin that got me even deeper into like the farm to school concept and working with local farmers to integrate experiential education opportunities about how to grow food into school, as well as like local food into school lunch menus and snack programs. So I ended up getting a master's in urban and regional planning and agroecology at UW-Madison to kind of like building off of this interest. They have a really great program there. And after that, I went to work for a local foods broker aggregator called Farm Logics based out of Chicago. So I've done a lot of work in local food systems and connecting local farmers to institutional markets before working at Vermont Law School. So some of that worked with farmers who also sold to farmers markets, and a lot of the work kind of was about building local food systems generally. So haven't specifically worked at a farmer's market or for a farmer's market, but very aware of all that's been going on. And was super happy to be able to work on this project when I started working at Vermont Law School's Center for Ag and Food System. So yeah.
Very cool. And there's a really great farmers market right outside UMadison.
Oh yeah. I know the woman who runs that market was my boss when I was working for the AmeriCorps program in Madison. It was at REAP Food Group, and Sarah Elliott, I think she still is running the Madison Dane County Farmers Market, but she was my boss. So really, really great to see all the work that's being done there. And that market is something else like no other I've ever seen.
Yeah, I was there a couple summers ago.
Oh,
I think
yeah,
I sent
that's
you guys
right.
pictures
Yeah,
where
you
it's
sent some
like
photos.
right in the center of town. And it's so
yeah.
cool because I'd never seen a market like that where like there's like a little like plaza in the middle and then the market goes
Kind
all
of a
around
donut.
it.
Yeah, that's sort of how
really,
Portland
really
is.
awesome.
The big market in Portland.
Yeah,
yeah.
I've never made it to Dane County, and I've always wanted to. It's one of the sort of iconic farmers markets in America. So one of these years I'll get up there.
So, well, that sounds like you have like a really incredible background with farmers markets and food
systems.
Yeah, you're super tapped in. Can you tell us something about the Center for Agriculture and Food Systems?
Yeah, so the Center for Agriculture and Food Systems is based at Vermont Law School, and we train students to develop legal and policy tools to help people in the food system pretty broadly. And our goal is to build a sustainable and just food system. So we're helping people with legal issues or policy issues and developing tools and resources based on issues that we're hearing that are coming up in the work that people on the ground are doing, such as farmers markets as like a category of people working in the food systems that we are hoping to like help by providing legal and policy resources. So we have a food and agriculture clinic that allows law students as well as master's students to have basically experiential education and learning how to provide legal services to clients. And so we have projects that these students work on, and they can get experience working with partners that we work with and help us create the resources that we develop. So some of the work that the Farmers Market Legal Toolkit has produced was initially researched by law students and some master's students. And then we have staff and faculty who supervise them to create, the final resource. But a lot of our work, we thank our students for all the work that they do on it.
Awesome. So it's kind of like a hands-on project for them, but also doubles as resources for people that get to use the toolkit and kind of use them to get all the hard work done.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And when you say final, is the toolkit static or is it evolving? Do you add to it? Do you update it?
Yes, we call it final in that it's launched and it's available, but it's definitely being updated as much as possible. So we actually just added content to the market rules and procedures section, updating what we had previously there for free speech, which we'll talk more about today. But we had a student do research in the spring on that topic. And so we wanted to update the resource to have the most up-to-date information that we could provide on that. And yeah, we continue to find things that we can update. It's just a matter of time, as you all know, any website. It's a lot to manage. It's a lot to update and continue to work on. So we're doing as much as we can with the time that we have.
Awesome. And were you involved in the original Farmers Market Legal Toolkit?
Yes. So I started at CAF, I think 4 years ago, and my coworker, Emily Spiegel, she was originally, I think, going to be part of the podcast too, but this month has been insane for her. She and I together were the ones that actually put all of the content on the website and built the website. We didn't draft it all ourselves. We worked with a bunch of content that had been developed by students, and Rachel Armstrong from Farm Commons helped with some of it. And we took it all and kind of built the website with a web developer. So very much hands-on building the Farmers Market Legal Toolkit, and a lot of the resources that you'll find in the resource section that are those PDFs that we've designed to accompany the online content in case people don't find it as easy to access the web pages. They can print out PDF resources as well.
And I'm curious, who came up with the idea of farmers markets need this legal toolkit? Did that come out of the Center for Agriculture and Food Systems, or was that somebody said like, hey, we need
Asking
this.
for it, yeah.
I'm really
What's the history of
yeah,
that
I'm glad you
project?
asked that question, because we always prefer that someone comes to us with a need, because we do not think that we just have answers to questions that we're coming up with. It really should be driven by people on the ground, like farmers markets. And so yes, we received information from Farmers Market Coalition in Nova, Vermont, and questions they've been receiving from market managers that a legal toolkit could help address. So it was very much driven by those organizations who represent farmers markets and farmers market managers with questions that were coming up. And if you go to the website, you'll notice there's 3 main buckets that we have. There's SNAP EBT. So a lot of the questions that we've been receiving were about SNAP at farmers markets. There's risk management, which is a huge, anybody who's familiar with that, it's a huge section.
Oh yeah.
We have
We get a lot of use out of that.
Yeah.
We manage markets in California, possibly the most litigious
Yeah,
state in the
yeah.
union.
And then
We're so proud of that.
Governance structures, business structures is the other main category of information that we have. So those were the 3 main buckets that were conceived based on questions from farmers markets. So we have been building out from that and finding that there is a lot right now, particularly in risk management, liability, that, there's questions out there and we want to build on to what we have. It's just such a big website. It's really hard to add something and not have it be buried. So we are constantly trying to figure out how to elevate the important information. And we do lean on Farmers Market Coalition to help us do the outreach when we develop new resources, because they have that direct contact with markets across the country.
That's good. They can kind of help determine what market managers are really needing and what's kind of like more prevalent for us as operations.
Because it's such a strange job that there's so many things involved in it that if you weren't in the industry, you wouldn't probably even think to ask or to research. So.
Yeah, exactly.
We're all getting matching tattoos, Lihlani, that say our job is weird. Do you want in? Yes. All right.
All right. Well, really kind of digging in. So during this even more heated than usual election cycle, and also this season of activism around equal rights, farmers market managers are dealing with some delicate issues around free speech at markets. Delicate, to put it delicately. We know you can't give us legal advice, but and we want to make it clear that we are not doing that either.
We are not lawyers.
As Kat always likes to say in our vendor class, I'm not a lawyer and I don't even play one on TV or something.
So. You see, you're too young to remember the commercial that's funny. Because
every time you say it, I don't know.
There's some old market managers out there that'll remember my age.
It still makes sense to me. You're not.
But we're not lawyers.
We're not lawyers. Okay, we get it. But this is good advice, or this is good discussion.
Yeah,
not advice.
Not advice, just discussion.
But with health permitting and other regulations that farmers markets deal with, free speech issues do have legal implications, which we are getting a lot of discussion going on in our Farmers Market Pros community on our Facebook page, and just people messaging us that are in the farmers market kind of network, and just having some kind of odd things that are happening at the market, or things that have always kind of happened, but now it's well, what do we do, and how do other people handle this? So does the Farmers Market Legal Toolkit address how market rules and guidelines should address free speech issues? Or can you talk a lot? I was going to say talk a little bit about that, but can you talk a lot about how we should be handling those kind of things?
Sure. So,
well, in the toolkit, what does it say about having something in the rules?
So in the toolkit, if you go to the Market Rules and Procedures section, there is a tab, you got to scroll down the page about free speech. And we've added as much content as we can there that is easy for people to access, but we are also right now finalizing a beautiful PDF resource that I will show to you all on the Zoom. I know we have a podcast, so those listeners won't be able to see it, but we are finalizing this PDF resource that we really hope to get out soon in the next couple weeks for markets to use. But I will talk a little bit about what we have in there, and I'll just...
And we can maybe link to the PDF when we post the podcast too. So
for sure, we're going to share all these resources.
Yes, definitely. And part of the PDF, there are 2 decision trees that we are finalizing to make it easy for markets to kind of conceptually understand what are the different trigger points or decisions that would lead to taking certain action versus others.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
wonderful.
so, and again, this is the sort of thing where Farmers Market Coalition, specifically DAR, and then NOFA Vermont, right now Jenny Porter is our point of contact. It used to be Aaron Buckwalter. They help us when we're editing these documents they provide the perspective of a farmers market manager and say, this doesn't make sense, this is legal jargon. And then we work to put it in the words that a person who's running a farmers market could understand. So yeah, we're trying to strike that balance between like providing specific legal information and making it like accessible and understandable. So I'll give one more caveat and then I'll talk a little bit about specifically what we have. But part of the difficulty in putting together a resource on this is because there's case law that you have to look at to try to understand what you can and can't do when it comes to free speech under the First Amendment. And so some of what we have to say is vague and is based on like principles that were established under different like cases that aren't necessarily applicable to a farmer's market. So I just want to put that out there. It's not something that it means a farmer's market has to go and look back at the cases, but one of the things that we will often say is if you're not sure, then you should probably consult a lawyer who is licensed in your state, or follow the more conservative like rules or the application of those to protect your market and to be safe.
So yeah, the question of free speech at farmers markets, we've been hearing over the past few months, and before COVID, we received questions about this, which is why we were doing research last spring. We got a little hung up because of COVID. It was not really the best time to be providing resources about free speech at farmers markets because farmers markets very quickly encountered a whole series of other very different issues. So we put the outreach and finalization on pause, and now we're coming back to it before the election. So you may wonder, what can my market do in terms of restricting speech or stopping people from doing certain things at my market? And again, I mentioned before, we have a resource coming out that will have a decision tree to help you walk through the different kind of rules that your market could or should make regarding free speech. But for the purpose of this podcast, I'll just talk through some of the questions that we have in that decision tree. So really one of the first things you have to think about is whether what you're thinking about restricting or prohibiting, is that speech? Is it considered speech or not? And by speech, that includes like verbal and written speech. Flag burning is considered speech. Soliciting is considered speech. And so assuming that what you're thinking about restricting or prohibiting in some way is speech, then the next thing we would need to figure out if it includes fighting words or advocates for, incites lawless action. Does it advertise for illegal conduct or products? And so there's a series of questions that if you answer yes to those, then that speech is considered unprotected. And so if it's speech that is not protected by First Amendment, you can restrict or prohibit activities for those types of speech. For the purposes of what we've been looking into how can markets create rules that are reasonable, but that may restrict certain activities regarding speech that would be protected under the First Amendment. So not threats or obscenities. We're talking about like other form, like protected speech. And so a lot of the questions that people might ask, like, how could I actually do that? What sorts of rules could I use? There are a few examples out there that you guys may have even talked about on this podcast. I'm not sure, but markets can use rules that regulate the conduct, but not the subject matter or the viewpoint. That's generally speaking. So reasonable rules would be like no signs allowed or no megaphones allowed, like things that may restrict the time, place, or manner of the speech. That is allowed. So you could have an area of the market that's like a speech activities area or a free speech area. So free speech activities can happen in that place, and you can have rules around that. But it's not saying if your speech has this particular viewpoint or is about this, then you can't do it, because that's not, you can't do that, generally speaking. So I think our resource is trying to help markets come up with ways to make sure that their market is safe. Like, in the end of the day, these questions come up because people probably are worried about safety and their market being able to run and run well during times where it can be really chaotic. So I would encourage markets to look into how they may update their market rules and procedures to include some maybe new rules, or be more specific in your rules about how to make sure that speech is happening in a particular place at like particular times. So not allowing that space to be used before the market is fully set up. So you could make rules like that, but it has to be reasonable. You couldn't say this market allows free speech in an area that is like 2 by 2 foot square area,
4 blocks away.
Yeah, like it's
over the bridge.
In your car.
In your own car at the door shut.
I mean, the scary thing right now is I've known farmers markets that had like a fenced off free speech area, and that's where political campaign things go and stuff. But at this point, a fenced off free speech area is just kind of like cage fighting, right? If they're all in there together, the tone nowadays could go badly.
Yeah.
I think, and again, you can write rules, but then it's enforcing them that's really tricky. So you could have rules that say what sort of behavior is allowed or not in the free speech area, and the level of noise, or like whatever. You can have specific rules, but if something does end up happening in there and a market has to figure out how do we enforce these rules that we wrote, and do we need to call the police? Those are really tricky situations. And I would understand why a market just doesn't want to get involved in that, because the purpose of a market is to run the market and to sell like locally grown goods to people who want to buy that. It gets tricky when a market is held at a place where it traditionally was used for public speech. And that's another question that our decision tree asks markets one question is your market privately operated or publicly operated? Because there's different things that your market probably should consider doing under those circumstances. And I think what we've heard from DAR at Farmers Market Coalitions is that most markets are not publicly operated. Some are, but most are not. So if your market is privately operated, and I don't know if that is a known thing, the percentage that are publicly operated or privately operated, but we provide information for both.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd say there's a lot of publicly operated markets. I mean, things that are like a function of the Parks and Rec department, that's the employee that's running that, or like in our case, we're a private company that does management contracts, but we're always connected with a nonprofit that's a part of the city, like a community association or a business improvement district. Mm-hmm. And I would say that has some elements of a public operation because they also get funds from the city.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes, this is exactly getting down into the weeds of it. Mm-hmm. You have to figure out whether your market is run by the government. That's one question, but then whether there's any what they call entanglement with the government. That's another series of questions, which is exactly what you were just talking about, Kat. Do you receive public funds, or are you connected at all, and how much to the government? And that is really, it's not really an easy yes or no. It's kind of on a case-by-case basis whether your market would be considered entangled with the government or not. So this is a situation where you might want to err on the side of caution and assume, yes, that you probably are related to the government, or you should be looking at that part of the decision tree rather than thinking that you're private. But it's really tricky. Having a lawyer that you could consult with that's licensed in your state would probably be a really good idea. because there's different things that you can do based on whether your market is privately operated and is publicly operated. And part of the question for privately operated markets is whether your market is on public land, which is another question, because, and that's what I was getting at with, there are certain places historically that have been used for free speech activities or for public speaking, like a town square, for example. So even if you had a privately operated market, if it's happening on a town square and it's a place that is traditionally used for speech activities, then you have to follow other guidelines, or we would encourage you to not restrict free speech like you would if it was a privately operated market on private land. And yeah, it's just trickier than one would think, as many things, especially when you start digging into it. There is not an easy yes or no answer for your market. What can you do or what can't you do? But again, we keep coming back to kind of some guidelines and principles that we think all markets can follow, which is not restricting content. So not making a rule that is specifically about a certain topic or an idea, and using rules that are more about time, place, and manner that activities are occurring. So again, like no megaphones are allowed at this market, or the speech activities are allowed to happen during these times and these areas. Those, you can do those, and you can build out those to make them stronger or more fitting for your market. But it's really tricky to make a rule that like restricts certain things from your market than others.
Yeah, so because we've had some questions, and I think this is somewhat illuminating that you can restrict the conduct but not the content. Because one of the questions that's come up is there a difference, and I don't know if this is addressed in the toolkit, but is there a difference between, say, political speech and speech related to human rights issues like justice based on race or LGBTQ issues? Is that a different kind of situation in terms of free speech than political speech, where you're campaigning for a particular party that's a entity that attracts money and has its own sort of power structure, versus, human rights, which is not, a campaign exactly?
So great question. We have not gone into that. I think that it's hard to make rules that are specific like that. I wouldn't advise markets on trying to do that. I would like to talk a little bit more with our other faculty and staff about that. I know we've received that question, and we have tried to provide a resource that is applicable to speech generally and does not get into other than differentiating between protected speech and unprotected speech, which I mentioned at the beginning. Unprotected speech includes, and this is kind of like legal definition stuff, but fighting words. So those are words that by the mere utterance would invoke an immediate breach of the peace.
That's pretty much everything right now.
I mean,
can you please wear a mask?
Can you please wear a mask?
Yeah, can you please wear a mask?
Those are fighting words,
apparently.
So. Don't bring your pet in here. Also a fighting
also
word.
Please
fighting
don't
words.
squeeze that tomato.
Yeah.
It's a different time.
yeah.
Is there a tree for like what kind of fighting words? What level of fighting?
What level of fighting? Like a quick punch, or outright wrestling? I don't know.
Or what would be like for real though? What would be like a fighting word? Like what kind of speech is that? Clearly, like when people are like burn this down, or like, is that what you're saying? Just to be clear,
We don't know.
You know what? I should put together a list on this research.
Yeah.
Here are the top 10 fighting words at farmers markets, because I don't really know, to be honest, like in the context of a farmer's market, what that might be.
And it's funny when you said,
general.
you got off track during COVID, because there were COVID things to pay attention to, and you wouldn't think that COVID things would be a free speech thing. It's just science, it's just medical stuff, but it's a huge free speech thing because people act like we're inhibiting their freedom by asking them to wear a mask and protect other people. Yeah. So it's morphed into what would seem to be a fairly cut and dried medical situation into a political and free speech situation.
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up too, because this semester a student of ours is working on the question about masks and ADA at farmers markets, because we have heard that there are farmers markets that there has been conflict over asking customers or vendors to wear masks.
Yes, ma'am.
Uh-huh.
We're,
You don't say.
You don't say.
yep.
Not just at
So-
farmers markets too, but yes.
And Lihlani,
Yeah.
I have a question. So far, we've mostly been talking about assuming that these free speech issues have to do with shoppers, people coming and visiting the market, or specifically visiting the market in order to discuss things in the public forum.
Yeah.
But what about vendors? Because there is this really interesting relationship between market managers and vendors where they are owning their own business and we are managing them and inviting them to participate in, this public exchange of goods. But do market managers have any, because technically you're charging rent from the vendor to be able to be there.
So they're our customer and and our tenant.
Yeah. So
But not our employee, although they appear to represent the market.
yeah. So do market managers have any legal recourse to restrict speech of vendors, because technically they're there to sell things, but only with the permission of the market manager? I mean, it makes sense that you wouldn't be able to tell just like a random person walking through the market what they can and can't say, but especially in these heightened political times, we've heard in our farmers market community that some market managers are having, some vendors discussing things in the farmers market that
Bordering on fighting words, for sure.
yeah.
Yeah, just like, can they say, I'm not going to serve a customer who's wearing a defund the police hat? Or can I hand out flyers about, like a vendor handing out flyers to their customers about like a rally on either side of the political spectrum? So those kind of things, they're kind of there at the pleasure of the market manager, just because they applied to be a part of our group and we accepted them. But I kind of hearing you say that what market managers should really be doing is taking a very proactive stance before it even gets there and making the rules really clearly defined. But how do we get kind of verbiage for that kind of situation into our rules about participating?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think you hit the nail on the head. I think it ideally could be something that is clearly laid out in the rules, like vendors cannot wear like clothing with political statements on it or something. I feel like that could be something, but that doesn't solve all the problems that you were just mentioning.
And that's something that we can do, even though that's kind of a free speech thing, because they're there representing us.
But it's a weird time too, because one of the questions that keeps coming up is wear your mask a political statement? Can they not can they not have a sign that says wear your mask because that's a political statement, even though really it's a bit of medical advice?
Just a little bit of medical advice.
Yeah, I don't, again, case by case basis, you'd have to look at the circumstances for these different markets. But I think if a market can look closely at their rules and like what is allowed in terms of vendors' conduct, what are things that vendors agree to do, that hopefully would alleviate some of this. It does not solve all the problems, because vendors, like you're saying, are individual people with their own businesses, and it's a really, really tricky situation. And I wish more people understood what market managers are dealing with. It's like a very specific job where you are pulling together all these different individual business entities to sell to the public, but you also might be operating under part of the city or something else. And so how do you make that work smoothly at a time of utter chaos? I do not have all the answers. I commend every market manager out there for making it through and continuing to do the great things that you're doing and getting like healthy food available to people, and trying to not have riots at your markets, and whatever that might look like. But yeah, I don't think I could say the question of like, could a market vendor not sell to somebody because they're wearing a shirt or something? Like, that's tricky, because like private businesses they follow certain rules, right? Like they should not discriminate based on certain things that are outlined, like,
Protected
religion.
classes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But that's a really good question, because it seems like that would go back to what the market's rules are as well. I don't know. I feel like I need to look at that. And I started looking into it because I knew that question was coming up, but we don't really have a clear answer on. I think
Because it's such a weird question.
Yeah.
How would anybody have an answer?
It's so specific.
Yeah, and we haven't had that issue, knock on wood, at our market where like we've had a vendor have that kind of situation with shoppers, but we have been hearing from other market managers that they're having.
I think there's a lot of it in the Midwest, though.
Yeah.
I mean, we've heard a number of questions from market managers in the Midwest that are dealing with that kind of thing.
Yeah. No, that's a really, it's a tricky situation. Again, like I said before, general rule of thumb, it's much easier to regulate the conduct than the content, and definitely not like the viewpoint.
Well, that's a good point to make, though, because I have never really even thought of it like that. Like when we make our market rules,
it's easy to remember.
I'm like, how do I like say this? But if I can remember to kind of focus on that, like the conduct, and not kind of weave my own, because it's hard not to weave your own like political,
like make
leanings.
Exceptions for yourself as
Yeah.
you're writing the rules.
Like you can wear this shirt but not this shirt, like it's hard not to say that kind of thing. But if I just think of it as kind of a broad thing, like really even if it's something I agree with, do I necessarily want people making a big statement at the market? We have to go back to like our mission statement is to bring locally grown food to communities.
And keep farmers financially sustainable.
Yes.
So encourage sales versus conflicts.
Yeah, and I think if market managers can just, what is the purpose of your farmers market? Is the purpose of it is to have these conversations and to bring communities together to, suss out their differences? Like, okay, that doesn't sound like really a farmer's market to me, but is that your mission statement at your market? Or is it like, bring it back to the purpose is like you're doing commerce here and you just need to kind of wipe away all that stuff during market hours, and it's fine at other times in places that make sense, but just kind of restrict the conduct like you were saying, which I think is making sense in my brain, at least as a market manager.
At least on the vendor side.
Yeah.
But like, the other day there was a dude giving a sermon like outside of our info booth for like 25 minutes and you kind of just have to let him wear himself out until it's like time to move on. Or, we talked about the Dane County Farmers Market a couple minutes ago, and it's like, that's literally like the Capitol Square.
Yeah.
It's like, that is like traditionally like where people would go, and like.
That's where the soapbox lives,
exactly.
right?
If your market takes place in a place where soapboxes are usually popping up during the week, and then you're there on a Saturday, you can't really expect them not to be there. So maybe like that's a good thing to think about as well, that I didn't really think about. And that guy giving a sermon, he might be there on Fridays as well. We just don't know about it because our market isn't there.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh, that's very helpful.
Yeah. It sounds like this is making sense to you all, which is great because we haven't like put the PDF resource out there yet. So we're checking to make sure that market managers it makes sense to you in some way.
Happy to be your focus group this morning, Lihlani.
Very happy. No, and we're really happy to even have this discussion, and I think we all need to remember, like our listeners and ourselves, like you said, it is specific, and it depends on like your state, and it depends on this and that, because it's, people can sue you for this, that, and the other, and of course in California it might be tougher than in some other places, and your client base and your vendors may like lean mostly in the same direction, so you're not going to have a lot of conflict, or you might be in a place where there's like literally like lots of battles going on for whatever kind of social justice or political or whatever's happening. So really kind of still having the discussions with people, and we're happy to have discussions with you and to lean on the toolkit like so heavily to get this stuff proactively kind of spelled out for everyone and just kind of help each other through this kind of thing, because not really what I thought I was signing up for when I was going to manage a market, but here we are.
Yeah, exactly. Like you said, making sure that the market can operate smoothly and that whatever market rules you have are supporting the mission of the market. Then making certain rules that do restrict speech activities to certain times or certain places or a certain manner of speech. That's what we're thinking is the best approach for markets during this time. Because again, the goal of having those rules is to make sure that your market can operate well and run, and that customers feel safe and that they can do business. And That's kind of like the toolkit in general is there to help markets just become like thriving businesses and be sustainable and safe places for all of that to happen. And we know that there's a lot of worry about liability across the board, like with different issues that are coming up and that have come up. But we want markets to feel like they can be empowered by understanding more of the legal concepts or principles behind some of these things. So that's why the toolkit's there, to give market managers a place to start. And it includes guidance that any market can use. Any market can apply some of those ideas to like your own market rules, or think about your governance structure and maybe you want to make a change in that area. But when it comes to very specific examples or questions and specific legal issues that you're really worried about, it is best to consult with a lawyer who is licensed in your state. Our toolkit is a toolkit, but it cannot answer all of your questions. Unfortunately, there's too much context specific things. We can only do so much.
Yeah.
Well,
this
enough.
is a really good time too, that the toolkit is coming out, and for market managers that are maybe, in hot zones where a lot of this stuff is going on. For some markets across the country, they're starting to wrap up their season, and for other markets that are year round, we are weirdly nearing the end of this year, where it's October. So a good thing to think about going into 2021, maybe it's time for you to update all of your market rules, both in terms of shoppers and vendors. And this is kind of a clean break for people who realize that they need a little bit more guidance in their market rules.
Yeah.
They can write all those things in there.
Just be clear about it. I have found that to be useful, legal or not, to just be clear. Be very clear. What time your vendors need to be there and set up. Those kind of things, that all ties into this as well. So just be clear. This is our guidelines and our rules and non-negotiable things. So
clear expectations, consistent enforcement.
Yes.
Back to our motto.
Yes.
And I'll also add in the resource that we're going to be sharing in a couple weeks, we're going to add some examples of markets that already have rules that we think are pretty good on this topic. We don't think people should have to reinvent the wheel. So, if there are rules out there that other markets have drafted that you could use and tweak to make it work in your situation, because every situation is different, great. But we're hoping to provide some kind of, not template per se, but examples.
Yeah. No, but that's helpful, because I feel like if we, like market managers, we're all kind of individual businesses. It would be helpful if we were all kind of consistent, as consistent as we can be across the board.
Yeah, because a lot of our vendors are in 4, 5, 6, upwards of, dozen markets.
Well, and actually
week,
that's something that we hear, that we get pushback on is I've just had conversation with more than one vendor this last Saturday about, why are your rules so strict with COVID and access and number of people on the street when I'm at this market
and we can do
10 blocks away and we can do whatever we want. We can eat in the booth. We can take our mask off.
We can show up whenever.
So, it would be lovely for all market rules to be consistent just across the board.
Maybe we'll print off that template and anonymously mail it to other market managers.
Every market in the country. That's right. Lihlani, before we wrap up, just a question. The Vermont Legal Toolkit, is that a free resource for farmers market managers? Do you need to purchase it? Do you need to be a member of an organization, or can anybody access that?
Totally free, open to anyone. www.farmersmarketlegaltoolkit.org. Check it out. Explore the toolkit. Fair warning, there is a ton of information there. So you may get overwhelmed, but if you have specific questions, there's a helpful little search bar, the little magnifying glass. You can type in the words that you're interested in, and it will pull the pages that have relevant information. Or just dive into one of the sections and take a look, but free for everybody.
Great.
Are there, just one quick question, sorry. Is it just for farmers market managers, or are there like legal toolkits and kind of rules and guidelines for vendors who want to do that with their own business, like for their employees?
Great question. It's the target audience is farmers market managers, definitely. We do have a section that does discuss market vendor relations that probably would be interesting for market vendors, but we don't really have super specific resources targeted to vendors. But I do think a lot of it would be probably interesting for them. And yeah, I mean, the SNAP and EBT stuff as well for vendors that are interested in that. But yeah, I would say it's targeted to market managers.
Yeah, so maybe they could take a look and just like tweak it, because their businesses aren't as huge and complex on this kind of level. I think, like, dealing with so many different businesses and the public, but I'm sure they can pull out some good information to kind of put in their own business rules and such. So
think about that for a presentation at Intense the Farmers Market Conference 2021, a little vendor legal toolkit. Perhaps.
Me too.
Great.
All right. Well, that was very informational.
Yeah, thank you so much.
I'm gonna go look right now.
There we go.
Everything.
Just everybody jump off and go dig into the toolkit. And Lihlani, you think the PDF, the decision tree, which sounds like a really clarifying tool, is going to be out in October?
Yes, that is our hope. We are in our last round of edits to that, making it look really nice and easy to use, and we'll send that to you all and post it on our website, and it should go over the Farmers Market Coalition listserv as soon as it's finalized.
Perfect, and we'll get that out to our group as well.
Yeah, we'll post it in Farmers Market Pros community on Facebook and get everybody pointed in that direction.
All that good stuff.
It's lovely.
Great. Faith?
And I need to say one more acknowledgement, which is for the funding that has allowed us to do this work, and that's the USDA National Ag Library. So thank you to our funder. The project was previously funded by USDA NIFA, but now the National Ag Library is funding it, so we're very gracious to have that support for this good work.
Awesome. That's wonderful.
Thank you for sharing
glad to hear that. Yeah. Excellent. Well, it was really great to speak with you, and keep up all your good and very hard work. And thank you for answering our questions as best you could. That was really helpful.
Awesome. Thank you all for all that you are doing.
Thanks.
And stay safe, stay healthy.
You too.
You too. Eat well, be well.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. We'll talk to you soon. Bye. Bye. Farmers markets are all about community, not just for the shoppers, but for the operators, farmers, and vendors. To hear what's happening from people just like you in the farmers market industry in various parts of the country, or share what's happening in your area, we have terrific conversations and people sharing resources over in our private Facebook group, the Farmers Market Pros Community. Please find us there, answer the 3 qualifying questions, and join the group. You can also message us on Instagram at Farmers Market Pros, or send us an email at connect@farmersmarketpros.com. Thank you so much for listening to Tent Talk. Please leave us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you access your podcasts, and tell us and others how you're enjoying Tent Talk. If you are listening on YouTube, give us that thumbs up and be sure to subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss our next episode. Tent Talk, the Farmers Market podcast, is proudly produced by Farmers Market Pros, where passion meets profit. Today's episode was recorded and edited by Justine Marzoni Mead. Original music by David Mead.